When my mother said in front of the whole family, "You are the biggest mistake of our lives," I just smiled. But what she didn't know was, from that very moment, I started to change everything. I'm Lena Carter, 29 years old, an interior designer living in Seattle. For years, I've tried to make my parents proud, but it never seemed to be enough. To them, I was the lost child, not as talented as my brother, not as obedient as my sister. I came to this year's family gathering hoping to reconnect, or at least be heard. But within just a few minutes, everything fell apart. What they didn't know was that after that dinner, I would make sure the name Lena Carter would be remembered in a way no one ever expected. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers, but from the eyes of those who were supposed to love you the most. Har. When I stepped into the house where I grew up, the scent of old wood and cinnamon pie made my heart tremble. It had been 8 years since I last came home for a family gathering, the sacred tradition, as my mother always called it. I brought the finest bottle of wine and a smile that I hoped looked natural, wishing maybe, just maybe, things could start over. But the moment the door opened, I knew something was off. No one ran to hug me like they used to. My mother just nodded coolly. "Oh, you're here. Good. Dinner's almost ready." Her hands were still dusted with flour, but they didn't reach out. It felt like I was a stranger who had knocked on the wrong door. In the living room, everyone was laughing. My brother Daniel was boasting about his new tech company and the sports car he just bought. Every story ended with applause. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, smiling, pretending to be interested, but no one asked me a single thing. When I mentioned my latest design project, a cozy cafe I had just completed in downtown Seattle, my mother glanced at me and said, half mocking, "So you're still doing that decorating thing? Can you even make a living from it, Lena?" Silence fell for a few seconds before a faint chuckle escaped from my aunt. I forced a small smile. "I'm doing fine, Mom." But inside, something cracked. Dinner went on, but the air grew heavier with every word. Every story shared was about someone else's success, everyone's but mine. It felt like I existed only to make them feel better about themselves. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. After dessert, when they started talking about the future of the family, my father proudly turned to Daniel. "Daniel's just been invited to the State Business Council. We couldn't be prouder." Then he looked at me, that mix of pity and disappointment in his eyes. "I just wish you'd find a serious path like your brother." I clenched my fork so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mother placed her hand on his shoulder and added a line I will never forget. "Don't expect too much. She was a mistake from the very beginning." The room went dead silent. I could hear my heartbeat pounding. Her words sliced through me like a cold blade, cutting into every warm memory I ever had. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could say that in front of everyone, but I didn't. I just stared down at my plate, swallowing the pain that burned in my chest. Then she continued, calmly, as if she were still talking about dessert. "We love her, but sometimes you have to accept that not every child is a blessing." I saw relatives avert their eyes, some shaking their heads, some looking awkward, but no one spoke up. Not one. In that moment, I realized, family can be the coldest place on earth when love is replaced by comparison. I stood up, keeping my voice steady. "Thank you for dinner. I have to go." No one stopped me. As I opened the door, the night wind hit me, sharp and freezing. I walked out, my shoes crunching over fallen leaves, the echo of their laughter fading behind me. A few steps later, tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from something fierce and awake inside me. A quiet, burning fire. Right then, I swore I would never let them look down on me again. Not through words, not through glances, not through silence. They would see me. They would recognize me even if it meant they'd regret it for the rest of their lives. I gripped my phone and opened a photo of my latest design. Under the dim light, my reflection looked back at me, not the rejected daughter anymore, but a woman ready to rewrite her own story. "The biggest mistake of their lives," I whispered, "was underestimating me." If one day your parents looked you in the eyes and said, "You are the biggest mistake of our lives," what would you do? Leave a comment, because for me, that moment changed everything. I still remember it clearly. The clinking of forks stopped. The ticking clock seemed to slow. Everyone froze, and my mother looked straight at me, her eyes calm but cold. "You are the biggest mistake of our lives." Her voice was clear, sharp, and cruel. I don't know how long I sat there. I just remember feeling like I couldn't breathe. Every memory of trying to make her proud, every handmade gift from my childhood, all of it vanished with one sentence. When I was little, my mom used to say, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." I believed her. I lived my whole life trying to earn that love again, trying to see pride in her eyes, even in the smallest compliment. But now, that same woman, the one who used to kiss my forehead every night, was saying I was nothing but a mistake. My brother Daniel looked at me, confused, as if wanting to speak. But Mom placed her hand on his shoulder, silently telling him not to. And that's when I realized no one in that room was on my side. I wanted to stand up, to cry, to scream, but my body refused. My tears refused. There was only emptiness, deep, cold, and endless. I managed to whisper, my voice shaking, "Mom, I didn't think you'd ever say something like that." She smiled a sad, pitying smile. "Lena, I'm just being honest. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better to face it." I looked around the table, hoping someone would defend me. No one did. Some avoided my gaze. Others kept eating, pretending nothing happened. That silence, that was the real betrayal. I finally understood that family doesn't always need knives to hurt you. Sometimes, all it takes is their silence. I stood up, forcing a small smile to hide the sound of my heart breaking. "Thank you, Mom, for your honesty. I think I finally understand everything now." She shrugged. "I hope you do." I walked out of that house like someone escaping an explosion. The air outside was freezing, but it was still easier to breathe than inside that room. In my car mirror, I saw my pale face, swollen eyes, but behind the pain, a faint light flickered. That's when it hit me. I had spent my whole life proving my worth to people who never intended to see it. And in doing so, I had lost myself. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to the coast, where the lights of Seattle danced on the waves. The wind was fierce, tossing my hair, and I sat there listening to the ocean crash against the shore. In the wind, I heard her words again, "The biggest mistake of our lives." I smiled, tired but awake. If I truly am a mistake, then I'll make them regret it for the rest of their lives. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through unread work messages, the ones I'd ignored because of fear and doubt planted by my family. And right then, I made my choice to change. Not to earn their approval, but to know deep down that I am enough. My story didn't end at that dinner. It began there. So tell me, if your family told you that you were the biggest mistake of their lives, would you stay silent or rise up and make sure they never forget your name? Comment below, because I chose the second path. They say there are two ways to get revenge. One is to make others feel the same pain you did, and the other is to live so well that they feel ashamed whenever your name is mentioned. I chose the second way, but it wasn't easy. After that night, I disappeared from their world. No calls, no messages, no concern. I knew that if I ever went back, they'd look at me with pity again, that same look that made me feel smaller than ever. I needed to turn my pain into fuel, not chains. The first few days were awful. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my pillow wet with tears, hearing my mother's voice over and over. "You are the biggest mistake of our lives." It echoed like a haunting melody. Each time I remembered it, my heart clenched tighter, but slowly. Instead of breaking me, it started to push me forward. I threw myself into work like it was the only way to breathe. My next interior design project was a small cafe in downtown Seattle, owned by a single woman who had been abandoned by her husband. When she told me her story, I saw myself in her, a woman who had been underestimated, broken, but still chose to rise. Together, we created a space called Second Bloom, meaning to bloom again. I poured my soul into it, every color on the wall, every light fixture, every tiny detail on the wooden tables. It wasn't just a project, it was a declaration. I am not a mistake. I am proof that pain can become art. On opening day, as the morning light filled the room and the first customer walked in, something inside me blossomed. It was a quiet warmth, one I hadn't felt in years. Second bloom soon caught the attention of local media. Journalists called it a place where wounded souls find themselves again. A design magazine even featured me with the headline, Lena Carter, the woman who built beauty from brokenness. I cried when I read that line, not out of pride, but because I knew I had finally broken the curse of my past. But the biggest surprise came when my mother found out. One evening, she sent me a short text. I saw you in the paper. You did well. Quote, 8 words. No apology. No warmth. Yet for me, it was the first acknowledgement in 29 years. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen and smiled because for the first time I didn't need her approval to know I was enough. Still, a part of me wasn't at peace. I didn't just want success for myself, I wanted them to see it, to face the truth that the mistake they once dismissed had become someone strong, radiant, and free. I started planning to open 2 more Second Bloom cafes in Portland and San Francisco. The media kept writing about it, and soon my name appeared in Architectural Digest. I could hardly believe it. The girl who was once humiliated at her family's dinner table was now being celebrated as a symbol of resilience and creativity. Every time I walk into one of my cafes, I look at the painting I hung in the corner, a single flower growing out of dry, cracked earth. Beneath it are the words, "They said I was a mistake. I proved them wrong. And I know this isn't the end." Because life has a funny way of turning things around. The people who once hurt you the most eventually come back. Not out of love, but because they can't stand seeing you happy without them. And when that moment comes, I'll be ready. Because next time they see me, I won't be Lena Carter, the family's mistake. I'll be Lena Carter, the woman they'll never forget. They once said I was the biggest mistake of their lives. But when the name Lena Carter appeared on national news, the first person who called me was my mother, the one who said it. It was an early morning in March. I was at my new office, a bright, open space filled with sketches, models, and design pieces when my phone rang. On the screen, 2 familiar words appeared. Mom calling. I froze. My hand hovered over the accept button. She hadn't called me once in 3 years. I used to think that if she ever did, I'd cry. But now, I just felt calm. I pressed accept. Hello. Her voice came through, trembling slightly. Lena, I saw the news. They said you won the National Design Award. I'm proud of you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 3 years ago, I could never have imagined her saying those words. I smiled faintly, keeping my tone neutral. Thank you. I did my best. Silence. Then she spoke again. I think it's time our family got together. Your father wants to apologize too. My heartbeat quickened not from joy, but from the memory of that night when they called me the biggest mistake of their lives. I took a deep breath. All right. But this time, I won't be the one staying silent. 3 weeks later, I returned to the house that had once been my biggest wound. The wooden door looked the same, but I wasn't. I walked in, wearing a white suit, standing tall with steady eyes. Everyone was there. My brother Daniel forced a smile. Lena, it's been a while. Yeah, I replied. It really has. Mom came out from the kitchen, eyes red and swollen. She looked older. When she moved to hug me, I stepped back. I wasn't the little girl who needed her mother's arms to feel worthy anymore. You look different, she said softly. I'm still me, I answered. The difference is, I no longer need to prove it to anyone. The room went silent. My father sat on the couch, teacup in hand, his voice low and rough. We were wrong, Lena. You did something no one in this family thought you could. I looked straight at him, then at Mom. Wrong? Do you have any idea what those words did to me? Every time I failed, I heard them again. You're the biggest mistake of our lives. I used that sentence as my fuel. Mom burst into tears. I was angry that night. I didn't mean it. I gave a faint smile, sadness flickering in my eyes. I know. But I also learned that sometimes a parent's moment of anger can shape their child's entire life. Luckily, I changed for the better. She reached out, trembling, and held my hand. Lena, I'm sorry. I was wrong. You're not a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. A tear slid down my cheek, not from forgiveness, but because I finally heard the words I had waited 29 years to hear. I looked into her eyes, calm and steady. Thank you, Mom. But I don't need you to tell me I'm right or wrong anymore. I just need you to know I found myself with or without your love. The room fell silent. The clock ticked like a heartbeat. My father set his teacup down, his voice trembling. We're proud of you, Lena. I smiled, a real smile this time. Thank you, Dad. But what makes me proudest is that I finally forgave myself for ever believing I wasn't enough. As I left, the sunset cast a golden glow over the old house. Before getting into my car, I turned back one last time. It was no longer a place of pain, but a landmark of growth. My phone buzzed with a new notification, a feature just published in Vogue Living. The headline read, Lena Carter, the woman who turned pain into power. I laughed softly, tears glimmering in the light of dusk. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore because now I had become the woman I once needed when I was little. I once lived my whole life just to be seen by my parents. Now, I live to help other children, the ones sitting in dark rooms, wondering, am I worthy of love? After that family meeting, I thought I would feel empty, but he didn't. I felt light, as if I had finally set down the heavy stone that had been crushing me for 29 years. I no longer needed their forgiveness to feel whole. I had already forgiven myself. A few weeks later, I received an email from a nonprofit called The Forgotten Voices. They wanted me to share my story from the rejected daughter to the successful woman. I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me was scared that telling my story would reopen old wounds. But then, I remembered that night when I was 19, crying alone in my room, writing in my diary. I wish someone would tell me that I'm good enough. I clicked reply and typed, yes, I'll share my story. The day of the talk, the auditorium was packed. I walked onto the stage under the warm golden lights. Hundreds of eyes looked at me curious, waiting, kind. I took a deep breath and began. My name is Lena Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I once believed I was a mistake. The room fell completely silent. I told them about the years of being compared, called a failure, dismissed in my own home. I told them about the night my family said I didn't deserve a place in that house. And then I told them how I used that pain to rebuild myself one design, one sleepless night at a time. When I paused, I heard a soft sob from the second row. A young girl, maybe 19, wiped her tears. After the talk, she came to me, her voice trembling. Miss Lena, my mom calls me a burden. But when I heard you speak, I realized maybe I still have a chance to change. Guy. I held her hand and looked into her eyes. You don't need anyone to tell you you're good enough, I said. You just need to believe that you are the most precious thing you have. That night, I made a decision. I started a new project called The Healing Home. It's a small program I founded for young people who've been hurt by their families, a place to learn skills, receive therapy, and start over. I used my savings and the prize money from my National Design Award to build the first center. Every corner of the Healing Home carries a message: bright rooms, green plants, white walls, and quotes everywhere. Pain is temporary, identity is forever. Every week, I meet new faces' eyes that remind me of my own years ago, filled with fear of not being loved. And every time I see one of them smile again, I know I'm doing something right. One afternoon, while reviewing new applications, I saw a familiar name, Daniel Carter, my brother. My heart froze. I didn't know whether to be happy or anxious. When he walked in, I noticed something different in his eyes, less pride, more regret. Lena, he said quietly, I'm not here to apologize for Mom and Dad. I'm here to learn how to be your brother again. I smiled, no anger, no bitterness left. You came to the right place. That night, when I left the center, the city of Seattle glowed softly under the streetlights. I stood on the bridge, looking at the water below, feeling the gentle breeze and peace in my chest. I knew my journey wasn't over, but I wasn't walking alone anymore. I used to want to prove to the world that I had value. Now, I just want to help others see the value in themselves. Gum. I smiled, opened my phone, and posted the first picture on the Healing Home's official page, a white wall with words I painted by hand. For every child who was told they weren't enough, you are. 3 years ago, they kicked me out of the house. Now they want me to work with them to rebuild the home. I have to decide, forgive, or turn my back. It was October. Leaves were falling in Seattle. I was at the Healing Home office when an email arrived with the subject line, Community Rebuilding Partnership, the Carter Family. I thought I misread it, but I didn't. The senders were my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I sat quietly for a long time. They wanted to partner with me on a project to renovate the old neighborhood where we grew up. Their message said, "We were once divided, but maybe now it's time to use each of our efforts to heal." What do you think, Lena? Those words made my throat tighten. Part of me felt seen. Another part felt suspicious. Was this just a way for them to clean up their image after what happened? Or did they truly want to reconnect? I looked out the window. Outside, yellow leaves danced in the wind, as if time was nudging me to close the past. But forgiveness isn't easy. 3 days later, I agreed to meet them at a small cafe near Green Lake. When I walked in, my parents sat side by side. Mom wore a gray sweater, tired but gentler than before. Dad was quiet, his hands folded on the table. "Lena," Mom began, "we read about the Healing Home. What you're doing, it's wonderful. We think if we work together to rebuild the old neighborhood, we could help many broken families." I listened, trying to stay calm. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Dad looked at me, his voice rough. "Then we'll respect your choice. But we hope you know we don't want to stand on opposite sides of the fence anymore." I looked into his eyes, searching for truth. There was no fake act, only tiredness, regret, and a wish to try again. I sighed softly. "Do you know what the hardest part of forgiveness is?" I asked. They were silent. I continued. "It's not getting past the pain. It's accepting that the person who hurt you can also change." Mom reached and took my hand, tears in her eyes. "We were wrong, Lena. You owe us nothing. But if you agree, we want to do something right together." In that moment, my tears fell. Not from anger, but from a real sense of release. "All right," I said quietly. "We will do it. But this time, not for our reputation, for the children who were once like me, who believed they weren't good enough." The project began a month later. The old neighborhood where I grew up became the Carter Family Renewal Center, a place for families in crisis to find connection again. I designed each room with soft light, warm wood scents, and artwork that reflected the healing journey. At the opening, I stood on stage beside my parents. Mom spoke first. "There was a time we lost our daughter to pride. Today we stand here not to atone, but to say thank you. Thank you for teaching us how to love properly." Applause filled the hall. I looked at Mom, then at the young people in the center, faces that once looked like mine, now shining with hope. I stepped to the mic, voice steady and warm. "I don't tell this story to repeat the past. I tell it to remind you that family is not just where you're born, it's where you learn to love yourself again. If I can do it, anyone can." The crowd burst into cheers. I glanced to the front row. Mom wiping her eyes, Dad nodding slowly. In that moment, I realized I had truly completed the journey from the rejected child to the woman who turns pain into light for others. That night, I returned to the center alone. Warm lights washed the main wall where I had written one last line. "Home isn't where you're accepted. It's where you finally accept yourself." I placed my hand on the words and smiled. Now I had a different kind of family, people learning to heal with me. I used to think revenge was the only way to be seen. But forgiveness turned out to be the greatest victory. Because in the end, I didn't need to make anyone regret. I just needed to become someone I was proud of. I looked up at the ceiling where soft golden lights reflected, and I quietly asked, "If it were you when the person who hurt you returns asking to work together, do you have the courage to forgive? Or will you turn your back and keep the wound?"